Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Away we go. Part two. I'm not sure how many parts are going to be. Maybe this will be it. Right. So, sort of, very quickly talked about the development of the package that ended up being called CASTEP and the fact that it was disseminated. Also, Volker Heine played a very big role in this. He had many collaborators in different scientific fields, and so he was very instrumental in, when he was talking to people in other scientific fields, saying, oh, well, maybe we could do a calculation with this new code. As a result of this, then we started using CASTEP, not just in physics, we've already talked about its applications in chemistry, but through Volker he was very involved in sort of earth sciences, so people in earth sciences started doing calculations. I had a long-standing interest in materials. I talked already about the link up with Paul Bristow and our work on grain boundaries. So, applications in materials, applications to cracks, again an area that Volker had been interested in for a long time and had collaborators in that. So suddenly we were doing lots of different applications of different scientific problems, different types of materials, but the thing that made that doable and allowed people in other fields to begin to use the calculations was because the CASTEP package was very well constructed, so it was, compared to most other codes at the time, relatively easy to use. So without that much instruction, people were able to start setting up their own calculations and running density functional theory, and suddenly finding that we didn't know whether the application was going to work or not, but now of course it's well understood that lots and lots of things do work, but of course each time you're running a new application, well, we don't quite know if it's going to work for this, or well, it may not work for that, but over and over again you were getting very useful information. And then there were plenty of examples where what started as a collaboration, maybe us doing the early calculations, then the people started using the code themselves, maybe brought their own computational people into the group and started looking at this diverse range of problems. So the ease of use was absolutely critical, and the wide range of applications that then led to was also very, very important. So we reached the end of the funding through CCP9, the funding that had provided Victor with Victor Millman with his funding. He'd created this package, and it was obviously doing everything it was meant to do. More and more people were using it, so one would have suspected that a Research Funding Council would say, wow, we are ahead of the rest of the world, let's go and support this area. Well, that's not how things work in the UK. It was like, okay, no, that's it, end of funding, bye-bye. So we were suddenly left with, we have these codes, you have this question about support, and what are we going to do? And it was around that time that we were beginning to have discussions with various companies, in particular with a company that started being called Cambridge Molecular Design, which was created by Patrick Coulter. He was in the materials department in Cambridge. He created this company, and initially they were mostly about...
What was his background?
Well, he did a PhD in Cambridge, and then the modelling work he did was mainly on sort of polymers and soft matter. Okay, when he was setting up the company and starting it, like all startups, he would make use of PhD students, often overrunning PhD students in the Cavendish, who would bring in and give money, and they would do various bits of software development. And as a result of that, then he became aware of what was happening in the Cavendish in this density functional theory area. And so he was interested in this. We were at the point where we were told we weren't getting support from Research Council, so the idea came up that maybe we could get support from industry, right? Back then, of course, the idea of tech transfer was something that very few academics engaged with, particularly in sort of the physical sciences side. Maybe it's more in the sort of the bio side. And back then, we didn't have a big tech transfer arm in the university. We had a thing called the Wolfson Industrial Liaison Office. and they had one or two people who did act as intermediaries, okay, in particular Richard Jennings. And he thought that, okay, if we were talking about trying to sort of, work with industry maybe as a way of supporting what we were doing, we should go and visit, the bigger players in the molecular simulation space.
Players means
Companies like Oxford Molecular,
Right.
so we visited a number of them, and maybe we may have included some big companies that might have had their own sort of modelling arms as well. So we visited a number of companies which didn't produce any leads, but the one with Cambridge Molecular Design, which had by this time become molecular simulations, that one did carry on. So we started getting into detailed discussions about how we might work together. They might market the codes, and initially the idea was that they would kind of support a postdoc in the group very long term. Okay, I was very fortunate because my best man for my wedding, who actually had was a control engineer, done a PhD in Cambridge, and then gone into commercial companies, he very sensibly suggested that whenever you're doing any sort of commercialization deal, make sure you get some form of royalty. Doesn't matter what it is, just make sure you get some sort of royalty, because then if the whole thing suddenly becomes very, very valuable, then you get a revenue stream. Okay, so we'd sort of started where the deal was just going to be, we license the codes to them, they can distribute it, we have a postdoc to carry on supporting the codes, right? And then we said, oh, well, let's just have a very small level of royalty. In fact, the very last deal was that they kind of pulled back from the idea of long-term supporting a postdoc, because I guess it's a fixed cost and you don't know what sales are going to be like, and then it compensated by increasing the revenue. And then, of course, so we got to the point where we were going to sign the deal, and then Patrick contacts me and he says, oh, we're going to need someone to actually sort of look after the code in the company. Is there anyone you can think of who might be able to do the job? Now, by this time, because the funding wasn't continued in Cambridge for Victor, he'd gone over to Oak Ridge National Laboratory, who was working there, and so I just said to Patrick, it's Victor Millman, and that's it. So Victor was just asked if he wanted this job. There was no interview, as far as I know. There was no advert. In those days you could do these things. You probably couldn't now. And so Victor, took the position looking after the codes in molecular simulations, as it had become. And we then, of course, it's a very long time ago, the idea of sort of open source software or free academic distribution software didn't exist. They were going to sell the code commercially, and so we did have restrictions on how freely we could distribute the code academically. So the people involved in the code were able to distribute it to collaborators, but only for collaborative work, and we couldn't have free distribution of the code, which of course now the world is completely different. Very recently, of course, that has now been reversed, so that CASTEP is allowed free distribution to academic groups for the standard not-for-profit work, as well as having a commercial offering. But I think that was when we did it was prehistory, and that simply wouldn't have been understood and didn't happen. And in those very early days, in the sort of 1990s, this was kind of like the emergence of atomistic modelling, and Oxford Molecular got very big and powerful. Biosim were US competitors to molecular simulations. It was, it's like all new markets. We're going to solve everything. We're going to do everything on computers. You can shut down your experimental laboratories. It did the classic thing of everything taking off, and then suddenly people are realizing that actually it's been oversold. I mean, every new market is like this, okay? And it happened to modelling, which meant that when you sort of went to the, I'm not sure if it was sort of late 1990s that the initial crash happened. Maybe it was, maybe it was about then. It might have been earlier. You have this problem that essentially, out of all these companies, Oxford Molecular, had a particular sort of marketplace, but they weren't competing really on the material side. So basically, the two big players were Biosim and Molecular Simulations. And Molecular Simulations have licensed CASTEP from us.
Also, is this company UK based or
No.
one of them?
Well, they're both American based, all right?
Oh.
When Molecular Simulations was American based, all right? And actually, why did they acquire Cambridge Molecular Design? All right? You don't know?
No.
Let me tell you the story.
Okay. Yes, please.
So, Molecular Simulations had got a contract to create a graphical user interface for atomistic modelling.
Okay.
Okay, so they had a big sum of money, get a bunch of software engineers, try to write a graphical user interface, and they failed.
Oh.
So, contract reaching the point where you have to deliver, what do? You look around for someone who has successfully made a graphical user interface. Because, whereas these are now routine, back in those days, they were really bleeding edge technology and not straightforward.
Right.
And of course, the great, success of Cambridge Molecular Design was that they had created this graphical user interface as your interface to modelling packages.
Right.
Yeah, that's why they were acquired. Right? They couldn't care less about CASTEP. I mean, it was all about we need a graphical user interface. They have one. Let's buy it. Okay. So they were American, right? And Biosim similarly were American. So we we then had this license agreement that CASTEP came and became one part of the Molecular Simulations package. The calling code, which became called Plane Wave, right? Well, back when modelling was the way of the future, Calling Glass bought Biosim.
Oh,
The
I
modelling
didn't know
company.
that.
Yeah. So actually, although it stayed being called Biosim, they were owned by Corning. Right? But then the crunch hit, all right? And you had two companies who basically had identical product ranges, doing identical things, and a market that was much less than it used to be. So the only way you could sell was basically by undercutting each other. And there's only two outcomes of this.
And I remember the situation in Taiwan. The local distributors of molecular simulation and biosim, they have to compete. They have to go to conferences.
That was nothing compared to Japan, where typically in Japan you had multiple resellers, even for molecular simulations, right? Who would be going after the same customers, right? So anyway, so. Biosim had the PlaneWave code from Corning, and then the two companies basically, if they were going to sell, it's only by undercutting the other. And the heads of the two companies realised that either they both die or they merge, and so the two companies merge together, and then of course they go through their product portfolios, deciding which code they're going to carry on in the future. So you have basically the PlaneWave code, the CASTEP code. Same methodology, same technology. PlaneWave is free because Biosim was owned by Corning, all right? Molecular Simulations has to pay a royalty for the CASTEP code. I only found out about this years later. Why did they go with CASTEP?
Yes.
There are so many lessons to be learned in terms of tech transfer, what matters, what you have to think about. I mean, you kind of think, identical products, this costs, this doesn't, I go with the one that's costless. Yes, obvious, right?
Right, yes.
So it isn't quite that straightforward.
Okay.
If you're selling a code into industry that hasn't, a company that hasn't any experience of this, okay, what do you want to do? Well, what you want to be able to do is point to scientific publications in the field you're interested in, all right, saying, look, it's done this, okay? Corning, the code was great, but of course, most of their applications were to glass, all right? Those were the ones in the public domain. Yeah, Biosim had their customers. They would have been using the code, but every industry, commercial in confidence, doesn't want to give anything away, that will give secrets to competitors. So it's actually very difficult to find out anything about industrial applications. And certainly, if you are already working with, say, a semiconductor company and you're BioSim, all right, absolutely no way you could go to a different semiconductor company and show them results from the company you were selling to, all right? Whereas with the CASTEP code, you want silicon. Do you want cracks in that? Do you want impurities in that? Do you want surface in that? Do you want to see chemical reaction on the surface? What exactly would you like in silicon, right? And all of this was in the public domain, peer-reviewed. You could point them. So when it came to taking it to new industries, the fact that we had covered so many scientific domains, so many different materials, so many different types of problems, meant that almost inevitably they could point to a published paper which was very close to what they were interested in. Okay. The other one was that because it was very early days, very often the company would say, well, that looks very interesting, but we don't have anyone who could do it. Right? And, do you know anyone who could do this? And, with CASTEP, there was now a big community of people, lots and lots of students, as you know very well. So there was, there were people who, in principle, were available if the companies decided that they needed it. Okay. In fact, I think most of the companies, because you had this really good graphical user interface, thanks to Patrick Alter, Cambridge Analytics Design, Lecture Simulations, and a whole point of the CASTEP software is basically once you got the structure, atomic positions, then you press go, right?
Right.
You don't actually need a huge amount of expertise to do it. So, very often, actually, the people started playing around, thought, I can create the system I want. I wonder what happens when and it all happened that you didn't actually need very highly expert people to start running calculations. And of course, the story that keeps coming up over and over again is, density functional theory keeps on giving useful information. It doesn't get everything right. There's certain things you definitely shouldn't use it for, but the number of things that it does give you useful information. And I think, this is perhaps where industry and academia have diverged, and I think it is a problem that academia needs to think carefully about. Industry understands that we're not going to do everything on the computer. At least not using quantum mechanical calculations. Yes, so they're never looking for a new material designed entirely on the computer. All right. What they're doing is saying, I have this problem. I need information to help me get that. Approach that problem, the sorts of things that you've come across with TSMC, right? And can I get some information on experiments? Okay, let's do those experiments. Can I get some information? Let's do those calculations. And you bring all that together with your great big meetings of all these people, and it's, can we find a way of getting around the problem? They're not expecting density functional theory to do everything. If it can do anything useful in the context of the cost of materials development, the cost of interrupted production if something goes wrong, then just getting any added value can of course justify having the software license and using simulation. Whereas of course academics, it's like, I'm going to design new material. Yeah? Really? Well, yeah, of course you can design a material that's ultra hard. Actually, ultra hard materials, we have got a history of pretty well as long as density functional theory of predictions of ultra-hard materials, all in 8 or 16 atom unit cells, and it's true that these things have higher modulus than diamond, right? And of course what they never do is say, well, when I've got a larger sample of it, does it just fall apart because it cracks? Does it get, eaten up by atmospheric oxygen? Because of course those aren't questions that you probe when you're only looking at 8 atom, perfect, infinite crystalline unit cells, right? And I think, my own feeling is that, academics could actually learn a little bit about what you need to be useful in the real world by looking at what industry does with these sorts of calculations. Mind you, we just said the part of the problem is it's very difficult to find that information out because companies tend to be very, very cautious about what they release. But, companies use it not to solve an entire problem, but to help them solve complicated problems. They're not doing everything on the computer. And I think, personally, I feel the academic community, if it really wants to be useful, if it really wants to help design with new materials, needs to stop thinking that this is something we can do entirely computationally and start thinking about where can we help with these sorts of processes. But that's kind of like an aside on what I think is, perhaps going wrong within, academia for the most part now. So anyway, I mean,
yes.
We created a commercial product, yes? Okay, so this was early 1990s, things were moving very rapidly in the 90s still in terms of additional functionality and, it still improves with methodology. And, despite, having, input from, professional software company like Molecular Simulations, the CASTEP code just got bigger and bigger and bigger in a completely sort of arbitrary way to the point where by late 1990s the code was undevelopable, right? And this is typical. This is what happens with most academic codes. We don't do proper software engineering. It's just about getting a result, getting a publication, move on, right? Very different from the idea of longevity. So there were younger researchers in Cambridge or people who were big users of CASTEP who knew the code in the UK, and the conversation started, and really I didn't have anything to do with the starting of the conversation, but those younger people agreed that their careers were going to be based on using density functional theory, pseudopotential calculations, that CASTEP was now so bloated that you couldn't efficiently add new functionality, and if you were going to actually do what they wanted to do, the best thing you could do is just start again from scratch, re-engineer the code, use proper modern software engineering practice, and do it properly, and then you could develop things rapidly. And I think probably the person who was most instrumental in this was Phil Linden, who was associated with CCP9, was also at Keele with Mike Gillen for a time. So he was kind of tasked with putting linear response into CASTEP. But the problem was that when he looked at the task with the code that was there at that time, it was, and there'd been the divergence between the parallel code and the serial code. I think someone said there were 25 different they're all conjugate gradients minimization, but 25 different versions of the minimization, depending on lots of different things.
And the memory allocation has to rely on C language and interface with Fortran.
Which is yes. I mean, so lots of reasons why it just wasn't technically feasible in the code as was. So I think he then contacted some of the people who were sort of very actively involved in software around CASTEP, and basically arranged a meeting, actually of a wider CASTEP community, saying, we think we need to start again. All right? And out of that, a smaller group of people who were prepared to actually commit to writing a completely from scratch total energy differential density functional theory code emerged, and in about 2000 they started that process. It was not clear that that code was going to become the new CASTEP. Right? They were doing it for academic reasons, because this was the only way they could do the research that they wanted to do, not to generate a code. And I was kind of like caught in the middle between molecular simulations and the developers, trying to sort of align, saying actually, this probably is a very good idea for the long term. Yes, it means that maybe things don't move forward very much in the next 3 years, but after that, then we'll have a product that can continue to evolve. And I think one of the things that they just didn't believe, given the industry standard for how much code a software writer, professional software writer, can produce, they didn't believe that the 6 people could actually write a proper, full total energy superpotential density functional theory code in the time available, in their spare time, because they all had research.
Do you have to convince hard to these young scientists that the new code will still be called CASTEP.
No, as I said, they were generating a new code. It wasn't CASTEP. Okay, CASTEP
yes.
was by this time, of course, because of the restrictions on the license, was very much identified with molecular simulations. Okay, so they were just writing a dense functional theory code that didn't have all these restrictions. Okay, and was properly engineered. So. Yeah, it was a 3 fraught years where I tried to at least allow the two sides to continue dialogue with each other. It almost sort of irreversibly broke on several occasions, but never quite, all right? And then ultimately, as it became clear that this code was working, it was there within 3 years. It didn't do anything beyond what the existing CASTEP code did. But, I think by then they were convinced that this group of people were really that proficient, that good, that they knew how to actually run code. And then, of course, you got the as this acceptance and, understanding grew, then you got what is still a model for how you should do software, right? Which is that instead of, in the past, if you ever licensed software to a company, they would take the software, they'd throw it away, and they'd rewrite it from scratch.
Oh.
Right? That's the standard model, right? Okay? Which is fine until something develops and a new idea comes along, because then you have to kind of do the whole thing over again, right? So, out of this process, and it probably took a little while, you suddenly got to the idea that actually these, primarily academics, were going to be the developers of a commercial code, right? And that's because they were doing all the things that professional software developers do. They were doing all the regression testing and all the rest of it. So, we got to a point, and it took a little bit of time to establish that this could really work, but got to a point where basically the development was primarily done by the academic group. Obviously, Victor Millman was still involved, and various people around him. But you have a group of academics who are developing software, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with this concept of technology readiness levels. So these TRLs were developed by NASA, and one describes blue skies research in the lab, right? 9 describes commercial sales, and it's all these steps that you make in between. So they sort of identify the various bits of the process. So you can look it up in Wikipedia. Okay. So what you ended up with when the whole model was proven to work and developed onwards was the thing with CASTEP is it is simultaneously at TRL1, because all of these academic developers, if they say, oh, maybe I want to develop a solid state NMR capability, I build it in this code. It's TRL1, right?
Yes.
If you carry on the same rigor of development, right? When you've shown that you can start predicting solid state NMR spectra, right? You can ship it straight out to customers at TRL9. And this has lost us access to a vast amount of tech transfer funding, because a lot of tech transfer funding is only if you're at early TRL. If you're capable of selling it, you can't be supported. It's absolutely idiotic, yes? But you get caught out. So why do you get that funding? Well, because we're too good, sorry. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And one thing, which of course I have completely failed to state yet, but which is a critical part of the CASTEP success, and it's very much tied with Patrick Coulter and the licensing to molecular simulations, was that so Patrick Coulter gave huge amounts of guidance and advice, but one of the first things he said when we were discussing the licensing was, back in those early days of these calculations, you suddenly thought, oh, I'd love to do a calculation on bromine. Oh, we need to develop a pseudo-potential for bromine, So you'd have someone who goes away and creates a bromine potential, and then he hands it back to the academics, or maybe they work together, okay? Well, that doesn't work when you're sending the code out to a commercial customer, all right? If they say, oh, we're going to do bromine, it's like, oh, we can't do that. You don't have a market, right? So Patrick, in his typical, absolutely accurate, insightful way, says, we need pseudopotentials for every element in the periodic table. Yeah. And then, of course, that links back to you, Ming-Hsien and Ming-Hsien Lee, that your pseudopotential database for the whole of the periodic table was absolutely transformative. Because instead of, you want to do something new, you find you can't because there's an input that you don't have, suddenly you had all that available to you. And so, again, a crucial part of this seamless, accessible, if you want to go and do this calculation, yes, you can do it because we have a database of pseudopotentials at whatever system you want to do. You don't have to come back to us to get a special request to get this done. So the bottom line of the success of CASTEP is the seamless access to the technology. Yeah. So having all the pseudopotential part of it, what we did with CASTEP to make it easy to use, to abstract out the complexity, right, even more so with the properly engineered new version from 2000, but the graphical user interface as well. All right, just give people the ability to do the science they want without a million and one obstacles. Ease of use is the critical part of that whole process. Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't clear that this new code was going to be CASTEP. Eventually the two sides got closer together. There were still one or two gremlins, but they all kind of got ironed out. And so finally, a full, licensing was set up. And the rest really is history because, there are very few software products that last for multiple decades.
Yes.
And if we're being, there's absolutely no doubt whatsoever that that first version of CASTEP that we licensed to molecular simulations would have had a 10-year lifespan, right? It was dying within 5 or 6 years because the code has lost the ability to maintain, right? Then that work in the early 2000s has given you something that, has lasted for over 20 years and can continue more functionality, more capability, and also, basically all this code developed, maintained by a group of academic developers, right? But working at the highest level of professional software engineering standards. I think that's quite remarkable. And, you point this out to people with other codes in other areas of science and engineering that this is the right model for how to do software. And everyone will agree, but basically putting everything on hold for 2 or 3 years while you re-engineer your code to get it to this point, it hardly ever happens. One of the stories I love telling is about the American ASCII program. Remember the ASCII program? We remember the ASCII computers.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the ASCII program, it was lovely. Actually, this is a perfect example of how to get a large sum of money, all right?
Okay.
So, how do you get a large sum of money out of the president in the US? Okay? Well, what you do is you spend decades saying, exploding nuclear weapons is terrible, so we need a test ban treaty. Okay? That's fine. Everyone thinks it's a brilliant idea. Okay? So, they sign the test ban treaty. What do you do the following day? You go and you say, Mr. President, as we can't detonate the nuclear weapons, then we can't be sure they work unless you give us $1 billion to do the simulations to ensure the integrity of our nuclear weapons. Right? And that's basically how to get $1 billion out of the president, right? You ban something and then say, without this, we need to do this. And that's what produced the ASCII program. And the ASCII program, again, is a great model of how you should run computing, all right? Third of the money went on the machines. The ASCII red, the ASCII white, the ASCII blue, the ASCII purple, whatever it was, ASCII some colour, right? A third of the money went on housing those machines, electricity, software licenses, and so on, right? What did the final third of the money go on? Rewriting the 12 nuclear weapons codes. And if you're interested in software development or project management, okay, then I think required reading is find the publication called Lessons Learned from ASCII, right? Because ostensibly it's about that $300 million spent rewriting 12 nuclear weapons codes. So it's partly about software, but it's also about project management, okay? So you had 12 weapons codes, you had $300 million to do it. So you're talking about, whatever it is, $25 million per code, all right? 5-year programs, all right? 12 nuclear weapons codes. How many code rewrites were successful in that time period of 5 years? 2 out of the 12.
Oh.
This is why people don't rewrite their codes properly, because it's hugely expensive, it's hugely time consuming, and even when you've got that much money to do it, it's so easy to go wrong.
Oh.
And the ones that went most wrong, again, are very interesting. The ones that went most wrong, when you can read this in the article, okay? The ones that went most wrong, where people were forced to use the most innovative ideas in software. Like, got this new code, it does everything automatically for you. This new approach to doing things. Let's do it that way, right? So instead of using tried and tested techniques, it's let's do things that are innovative. And they were the ones that were most off. I mean, eventually everything got done, okay? But only 2 codes were done within the 5 years, right? So other codes took longer to do. That's happened in the US. What happened with CASTEP? Well, 6 people in their spare time, because they had day jobs as PhD students or postdocs, they had research to do this in their spare time, rewrote CASTEP from scratch. There wasn't a single line of reuse in the code, right? And they succeeded at no cost. Do we ever triumph that wonderful UK success? Again, no. No. I say it over and over again, no, because it will show everyone else out. If you can do it for CASTEP, why can't you do it for everything else? So suppress the ones that work, because then it doesn't show up the ones that don't. Yeah? Yeah. I mean, it is an absolute triumph, okay? And the mere fact that CASTEP is still there, still being developed, still moving on, 20 plus years after the new code became CASTEP. And you just look at the functionalities that have been added, with this very modest team of people, obviously, with their help of their students and postdocs in their research groups, but with them overseeing this and doing most of the work themselves. It's really quite a remarkable achievement. Okay.
Great.
Good. Have we covered most bases by now?
Yes. So sorry, what?
Have we covered most bases by now? Is there anything I haven't covered? Well, what you can do is you can go away and have a look at what you've got. Okay.
Yes.
And then you could maybe come up, if there are things that either want to be expanded on, or you've got a specific list of questions, or whatever.
I will prepare.
We could do number 3, and you can just leave all this stuff here. So
okay.
we can go again. Okay.
Okay. Great.
Good.
Oh, wonderful. Right.